Hello, listeners, and welcome to Teachers Have Issues. Yes, I am your host, Lana the Educator. If you are a first-time listener on this channel, welcome. Here we explore the latest educational trends and tackle pressing issues facing the education sector. We also conduct insightful interviews, as you will hear shortly, with people making a difference and share stories of triumph and innovation from around the globe. If you're interested in all of this, then like and subscribe. Today, we are joined by a remarkable environmental innovator who is bridging the gap between grassroots farming and cutting-edge climate solutions. As the award-winning project coordinator behind the Building on Vetiver initiative, he has pioneered sustainable geoengineering approaches that earned international recognition from the Inter-American Development Bank, beating out 70 projects across 20 countries. From his roots as a wholesale farmer in the Belle Vue Paramin to leading national-scale organic waste transformation projects, our guest today brings a rare combination of hands in the soil wisdom and sophisticated environmental project management. At the Carbon Zero Institute of Trinidad and Tobago, he has actively shaped climate adaptation strategies that don't just look good on paper, they work in the real world. His innovative work with the Vetiver system has become a model for community engagement and sustainable engineering. While his leadership in transforming organic waste into soil amendments is reshaping how we think about circular economies in the Caribbean. Today, we explore how his journey from farmer to environmental change maker is creating practical solutions for some of the most pressing climate challenges. We'll discover how traditional knowledge can inform modern sustainability practices and learn what it takes to turn environmental initiatives into award-winning success stories. So please welcome Nikolai Emmanuel, a true pioneer in bridging the worlds of practical farming and environmental innovation. Welcome, Nikolai, to Teachers Have Issues. Yes.
Hi, Lana. Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah. So what first got you interested in environmental science and sustainability?
Okay, that's a great question. Well, having grown up in the farming community of Paramin,
Mm-hmm.
I've always had a keen interest in farming. Uh, my dad, he was a farmer for, well, 30 years before he had me.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and ever since I grew up, all of my close family members have been involved in farming. My grandmother, both of my grandparents actually have been deeply involved in farming. And I got my first touch of the soil, I would say, at a very young age. So
Mm-hmm.
um, I was one of three brothers, and as the youngest, I seemed to be one of the only ones who took a real interest in going out into the field with my father. So I really enjoyed, being outdoors and seeing what the environment had to offer at a young age.
Mm-hmm.
And then growing up and coming into secondary school, it was actually one of my educators who really ignited my passion for environmental science.
Mm-hmm.
That would be Mr. Joe Casabon.
Yeah.
He was my Form 6 environmental teacher.
Mm-hmm.
So again, just with a general interest in pursuing environmental science, I had decided to look at that a step further when I was doing my A levels,
Mm-hmm.
and it's really in the way that that course was delivered, and understanding and seeing the passion of Joe, as we used to call him, and seeing that that is really what showed me that you could have a promising career, fulfilling career actually in environmental science. So I wasn't sure about exactly what career I could have.
Mm-hmm.
I just knew I was very, very interested at that point in continuing my studies with environmental science. And that is kind of what pushed me to select that after the A levels.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I went on to do environmental science and sustainable technology
Mm-hmm.
at UE, which, yeah, I really, really enjoyed.
So what does a typical day look like on your job?
Well, as a project coordinator, I have to speak through the lens of working with NGOs and working alongside different non-governmental agencies. and civil society. Yeah, so I have to consider working alongside, looking at it through that lens of working from the NGO field, because that's really where I've had my experience gained.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say it's a unique experience, very much different from some of my colleagues at the IMA and the EMA,
Mm-hmm.
who are more directly linked to the government.
Right.
The the processes by which you go about getting funding
Mm-hmm.
is a little more complicated and a little more involved than when you're directly working with a government agency. So a large part of the task is actually, keeping abreast with what is relevant and what is current and where funding is available. And then once you secure funding for these different environmental projects, and this funding could come from various multilateral agencies. For example, um, the Inter-American Development Bank, so the IDB. You have different organizations like CRIF, the UN. They offer different grant opportunities as well as small loan opportunities. And this is how civil society and NGO programs, they get started to do different, good works, I would say is the best um, umbrella term to phrase it. That is how a lot of developmental works actually take place within a country. And different NGOs have uh, we have different things that we focus on. So for example, you have Fishermen and Friends of the Sea, who's quite clearly in their name, they would focus on objectives to do with marine protection. And then you have other organizations like I Am Movement. They focus on a broad spectrum of different different issues. Then the Carbon Zero Institute, where I am now, we focus really, really heavily on climate mitigation and adaptation focuses, right? And that could be very broad from things like helping with uh, doing things like carbon assessments, simple things like that, all the way up to managing projects that focus on assisting with things like food security, um, and ensuring that, farmers have access to the right tools and equipment that they need to be highly productive. So I think one thing we need to clarify as well when people talk about environment, a lot of the time they hear this term and they immediately think, okay, just green and protect the trees and the animals, right? I know that's a common interpretation of what an environmental specialist does.
Right.
But people often forget that we are part of the environment. Human beings are part of the environment.
Mm.
So we need to understand and work on different systems that allow us to sustainably operate within this whole ecosystem as well.
Mm.
So it is about working to find balance. Um, so beyond that, a typical day would go into actually executing one of these projects. So after you do, well, if you're fortunate enough to actually get the funding, most of the rest of the time is actually spent deploying these projects. They have a specific timeline for you to achieve the certain objectives that you've laid out. So you really need to plan carefully how you're going to allocate all your resources as well as your time. And, you know, in NGOs, it's a very small team usually that's working. And you oftentimes have more than one project active at the same time. So planning and, you know,
Busy day.
planning
It
is
sounds like a
yeah.
busy day.
Planning is very, very involved in the day. And then networking and communication, I would say. So reaching out to try to get partners and get stakeholders on board from different agencies like the EMA, like the IMA, different private stakeholders who may be interested in the task that you're trying to achieve. So be it increasing food security, be it looking at education and awareness. So this would involve reaching out to different ministries to support different events that you're having, for example. So different climate workshops, different educational events, different tree planting activities, for example. You would reach out to try to gather support as well from these governmental and public institutions, public and private institutions. So it's really an effort in working to ensure that what you've described in your proposal, that you're aiming to complete the objective, it's really a process in working to achieve that. And one thing I'm particularly proud of, to say in the projects that I've worked on, is that we have looked for synergies all the time within the projects that we've been working on. So I would have mentioned that different NGOs, oftentimes they're not only working on one thing. So where it is possible to find synergies and linkages between these projects, and kind of increase the scope that you're going for, I think that's really, really a beneficial thing that can be done to maximize the resources that you have at your disposal. So
Excellent.
that's
Yeah.
where I spend a lot of my time.
Yeah. Earlier you talked about, which I found was very important. You mentioned that we are part of the environment as well. And it made me think of, how do you convince people, you yourself, not just general people, to care about environmental issues, that you yourself care about? How do you do that?
Well, personally, I try to get folks to look at it through an adaptation lens. And adaptation is simply preparing for what you know is coming, right? So a lot of the time, I find, in my opinion, uh, in the climate discussion, you hear it sounds a lot like doom and gloom, right? That there's not much that
Yes.
we could do.
Right.
Yeah, and that tends to scare a lot of folks. Um, so how I like to approach it with individuals in convincing them is that, okay, we rely on our environment. We still need to, for lack of a better word, exploit certain resources for us to maintain our well-being.
Mhm.
And Trinidad and Tobago is a particularly good example because we make our living off of oil and gas. Um, so keeping in mind all of these things and looking at the data and the information on what climate change is expected to bring, um, I think if we focus on what we could do, what solutions can we put in place to prepare ourselves for these impacts, I think that better serves the population rather than just saying, okay, if we don't do this, we're going to end up in X position, right? In a
Right.
bad position. So I find that reinforcing the positives that are going to come. Okay, so if we implement, for example, this vetiver solution, the benefits that you are going to see are going to be you're going to have reduced erosion, you're going to have improvements in your farm soil quality, you're going to have improvements in safety, you're going to have improvements in accessibility. So rather than just approaching it and saying, okay, this is a climate solution that we're installing, um, I kind of always tend to focus on what are the benefits and the positives for you as the individual, as the farmer, as the single mother. What is it that this solution or this intervention is going to do to impact you positively, in spite of all the different climate changes and impacts that we might be facing. And when people could relate it to themselves, so when the farmer could see that, okay, if I implement these solutions, yes, it's going to help protect the marine environment by keeping debris upstream and out of the oceans, but it is also going to benefit me positively. So I find when you can show that linkage is when you see a really, really positive response from all participants.
You touched on it, so this can take us a little bit more into your technical expertise because I myself was wondering. I know it's named Vetiver System, and based on what you told me, building on Vetiver project, what is the Vetiver System, and what's the role it plays in this sustainable geoengineering that you're doing?
Right, so the Vetiver system, I have to give a big shout out to IAM Movement
Uh,
and Vetiver TT,
right.
Environmental Solutions.
Hmm.
They were actually some of the pioneers in reintroducing the vetiver system in Trinidad and Tobago. And I had the good fortune of working with them after I completed my degree.
Okay.
And the vetiver system is actually a means of utilizing a particular species of grass that has a unique feature, right? So one of the characteristics of this plant is that its grass is non-invasive. So if I plant it in a particular line, a particular orientation, it's going to stay there and not spread. It's just going to get thicker. And the great thing about this grass, beyond its dense roots, beyond its thick leaves, are its really dense and fibrous roots, and they grow straight down, right? And uh, most people usually get the guess wrong, but in 2 years it could grow more than 10 feet deep, right? So when it's applied in what we call the vetiver system, right, you could achieve certain functions with it, and people use it for land stabilization and erosion control as one of the main functions. So if a farmer uses it to border his property, particularly on slopes, right? So I'm from Paramin, so that hits particularly close to home. You could see a lot of improvement in your soil quality. It helps with erosion control and keeping a lot of the topsoil on. You could actually make very beautiful handicrafts from the leaves, right? You can dry them and plait them
Okay.
into these wonderful baskets and ropes. And that is actually sold now. So through the project, through the Building on Vetiver project, we kind of re-energize that handicraft component. And it's still going strong again through the interventions of civil society. Um, and I guess really without the support, that would not be possible. To really get the interest, to kickstart, the interest in this old or lost technology, to really bring back a lot of the education that was missing. Because the vetiver system, as great as it is, it's education that we're bringing back, right? I think that's something that should stand out. Our grandparents knew about the vetiver grass and the vetiver system.
Yeah,
And
because as you're talking, I'm wondering if it's those like hats that I see people go around selling sometimes. Is it that kind of grass that sometimes you see
it's similar
in
to
the
it.
Emancipation Village and stuff, people come around selling like these hats and these baskets from some kind of grass material. I'm wondering if it's
It
that.
very much could be because in Moruga there was a very, very strong presence with the grass.
Mhm.
In Lopino there was a strong presence with the grass. But in the past, right, and that's what we found through actually through actually deploying the project. We found that the grass was here. It was here for quite some time before.
Mhm.
But glyphosate, a particular type of weed kill, is really, really effective in getting rid of it, right? Or any grass selective herbicide is hyper effective in removing it because it is a grass, right?
Mhm.
And a lot of it was just destroyed through chemical usage. A lot of farmers chose to expand their gardens, uh, build retaining walls where, building material was cheaper in earlier days. Now it's not so, which is why people are choosing to turn back to the nature-based solutions, like the vetiver system. Um, but is this loss of technology? You have to ask yourself, what other nature-based solutions, what other bits of information have we lost that
Mhm.
have been beneficial to us?
But does it just look like you say just the guy has the grass just growing there? Does it look like what we call elephant grass and razor grass? Sorry?
The closest family that
Mm.
most trainees would know, I would
Mm.
say, is lemongrass.
So the thing is, have we been mistaking it for that, and therefore, as you say, it's a threat now because we look to get rid of it when it's really vetiver grass is something that's positive and that's something we should be looking towards. So is that a challenge that you have had to face where you want people to maybe be utilizing this sort of vetiver grass, but then you have the threat of them mistaking it for something else and then cutting it or using herbicides and so forth? Is that a challenge that you've come up against?
Definitely.
Mhm.
Through some of the programs, well,
Mhm.
through all of the programs actually, we had an education component where we went into
Wow.
communities and explained, okay, this is the vetiver system, and we showed persons what the grass was. And I could recall my interaction with some of the participants, and some of them they were surprised. They were like, "Oh my God, I work construction." And I used to see this grass. This
Right.
is I remember now. But one of them used to tell me exactly, said, I used to see this grass and we used to try everything to get rid of this grass. Now, mind you, the vetiver grass is highly resistant. Almost nothing else will kill it other than that herbicide. Right?
Wow.
You'd have to dig it out or kill it with the herbicide. It's
Mm-hmm.
fire resistant. Once the roots grow quite deep,
Mm-hmm.
um, if you trim it, it's gonna grow back. So he was telling me they're on a construction site. They
Mm-hmm.
throw all kind of old rubbish on top of it. They burn it, it grow back. They cut it, it grow back. They stand up next to it, they try to chop it, chop it, chop it.
All
The
right.
man stand up about 10 minutes and he ain't make no progress. I laugh. He says, only now he realizing what it is and the
Right.
value of what it is they were trying to remove. So again, putting a wall. And the vetiver system, it could actually show up to 90, in some cases 95% cost saving.
Mm.
And it performs almost the same function as a retaining wall in certain conditions.
Mm.
So where you need a small retaining wall, you could
Right.
actually replace entirely with a nature-based solution,
Yeah, because
which
that
is
is what
just
I
the
was
flow.
just about to ask you. Is it that you're saying, because I know this ended up being you had award-winning results with this building on the Vetiver project. So is it that there was a drive to have people, as you keep saying, use these natural-based things instead of using man-made? And how successful was that?
Well, the nature of the award winning,
Mm-hmm.
that came from the synergies. And again, I need to shout out my old NGO, I Am Movement,
Mm-hmm.
and all the hard work that we did together in synergizing a lot of the projects that we had that really focused on vetiver. So when you're deploying projects, you have to provide some financing of your own as well. And one of the things we were able to achieve in synergizing was really boosting the value of that co-finance, um, which essentially could be seen as the amount of output that we were able to achieve. So for the value of the grant, we were able to achieve about threefold the value of the grant in co-finance. And that came from um, developing projects that would assist in scaling the deployment of the vetiver system. So giving out a timeline, it
Mm-hmm.
looks something like we started with 8 communities, and we only wanted to do very few sites within them, maybe one site. So that might be 8 different locations. And then building on this, so again, the purpose of building on Vetiver was to really act as a tractor or engine um, to push a lot of um, motivation behind, getting this nature-based solution back as a primary focus of a solution being adopted in Trinidad, right?
Right.
So being able to link this now and then grow it, we were able to expand the project now to target every household in Trinidad across 8 broader communities. So all the households in an area, for example, Lopino, they were able to contact I Am Movement.
Mm-hmm.
And now through the MeWe Green program, which was an expansion and a building upon the Belle Vue project, they were able to now target more households, and that we were able to have more participants, thereby uptake the solution, right? Because now you have more resources, you have an expansion of the project, and this kept us going for quite a while.
Okay, interesting. Could you elaborate a little bit more? I know when I read like your profile, it talks about your experience with organic waste diversion and converting that into upcycle soil amendments. So tell us a bit more about that and any, challenges that may have come up in executing projects like that, organic waste diversion and conversion into upcycle soil amendments.
Well, following my time at I Am working on the Building on Vetiver project, amongst others that again focused on the vetiver solution, uh, I had the pleasure of working on the Closing Loop project. They have actually greened a lot of the fat with the scenes, right?
Mm-hmm.
And to explain for a lot of people who don't know what goes on there, greening a fat is actually they divert a lot of the waste or prevent a lot of the waste that was going to be generated from being plastic. And they divert all compostable waste and compostable waste materials to a composting facility, a certified composting facility, actually one of the few in the Caribbean. And they have it composted and turned into topsoil. Right? So normally this waste would end up in one of the landfills.
Okay.
And could you make a guess as to how much organic matter actually takes up space in Bito?
I don't know. I can say a lot.
Organics make up of, if I'm not mistaken, I think it's more than 50% of the waste. Right? So if we have the ability to divert some of that and upscale it, right? So you actually convert it into a different product. Then not only are you keeping material out of the landfill, right, which has all the benefits of emission reduction,
Okay.
right, but you're also now creating a product that one could sell that benefits the economy. So you're helping the environment and you're helping your local economy as well. So it's a win-win situation in that sense. So that project really focuses on trying to capture a lot. Well, the ultimate goal is to actually capture um, all the organic waste from Trinidad and Tobago and actually divert it, well, primarily towards recycling facilities that can convert these into composted materials. And then these materials haven't worked with NGOs. They work with NGOs now to distribute some of the material as well to go towards different restoration projects that involve tree planting and soil improvement. So Closely Loop works closely with IAM Movement, who works very closely with national quarries to do quarry restoration in Sandy Grande up at the national quarries, where they plant different trees, and a portion of the amendments that are created from this diversion are used to treat the soil, which is in no condition to grow trees prior to treatment. So it's used to actually bring life back to the quarries as well. So that is an entire circular function. And I had the pleasure of working there for a while and helping set that project up and work with the team there. So I was really grateful for that. And then my son was born and I had to take some time. So I took a year off after that to be home with my wife. So one of the different bits of education that I had the experience with, you know, was with the birth of my son. And that kind of shook up the realities of having to work and be a good husband as well. And then I was fortunate enough to, yeah, be able to come back out and, join the working world again. This time with a couple private engagements again as well. Managing different projects again. So project management, I would say, involves a lot of networking. Again, as you would imagine, trying to find clients and different projects to support. And yeah, working with a lot of these different multilateral agencies.
Yeah, so you kind of brought us a bit there into the personal realm, and I was curious when you talked about your personal life. How has this job that you're doing now changed the way you live your life?
So staying home though with a child 24 hours a day, and it really is 24 hours a day, because the night is a full-time job as well. It became quite a lot, on my wife. So in the early stages, we really needed to work together to, just to keep the sanity, to keep the sanity levels over, because I mean, working is fine and great and all of that, but I believe in, maintaining a healthy family first. And I was in a position to be able to do that. So, but in this role that I'm in now, I work primarily from home. So it's primarily remote because the office is quite far from Paramin. Um, but thankfully, my employers that sees it recognize the distance, and we have a good arrangement with work from home.
Yeah.
I became quite seasoned during that awful time we know as COVID, uh, with getting familiar with working from home. Um, but different roles demand different, different capacities, so you would need to be there physically for some things. But yeah, well, in the early stages of having a child, I think it's really difficult to be everywhere. Yeah, and I'm in a position to be as flexible as I can again, be in the field, be in the office. So I'm really grateful that the job project coordination actually allows for that type of flexibility in some cases. In some cases, it definitely doesn't because things tend to get crazy when
Right.
you have multiple projects afloat. But for now, at least I could say things are calm. Uh, I'm actually pursuing my master's as well, so
Congrats.
balancing work. Yeah, so I actually got a scholarship to pursue my master's in integrated coastal and ocean management. Um, so I'm looking forward to, developing my skill set there as well to continue to help Trinidad and Tobago, to be honest. Being a dad now, I recognize the importance of developing a country. Um, and it's actually made me look at some of those leaders who we have in charge who actually are parents as well. Um, to kind of put myself in their shoes
Mhm.
because I'm assuming now that they also want the same thing, a good country for their children to grow up in as well. So a lot of people oftentimes think politicians are selfish. But I think even if you look at it in that same breath, um, at least I would say if they are parents and part of the society of Trinidad and Tobago, we all want a positive environment for ourselves, right? So in the same vein, where I was explaining, that's my tactic in explaining to folks how they could contribute to the climate battle. What is the benefit for you if you do take part? Um, being a parent is kind of shown me that, other persons who have kids, a lot of the times that's what they working for and why you're trying to improve a certain situation or certain environment is for the next generation. So it's only after becoming a parent I really understood. That's why a lot of people go out of the way to make some of these things happen. So it hits a lot closer to home now when I'm working,
Mhm.
and trying to achieve some of these things that I'm trying to achieve. But really and truly, yeah, Trinidad, trying to help Trinidad and Tobago out as a whole. Um, I don't see anything wrong in that. And I really hope that I could encourage more young persons to get involved and then stay committed sometimes because I know it is difficult in certain fields. So the environmental field being one of them to find specific jobs. Um, but I also really, really believe in education as well and investing in yourself. Um,
I'm glad you
so
touched on that because I want to do something, at least in this episode, for the students in terms of I know they're environmental science wasn't a thing when I was in school. It wasn't an option
mhm,
at the time. And it's been offered at Form 6 now. And many students have, taken the option to pursue that line, just like yourself, that career path or show an interest in that. So it would be good to hear from somebody who's been through it in terms of what kind of jobs can someone get in environmental
yeah.
science? I mean, they're doing it now, but besides project manager, what other kind of jobs can students or people who pursue this get?
So that is what I wanted to touch on. The opportunities, if you stick with it, there are so many. So you have occupational health and safety, right? For those of you all who looking to get into the petrochemical industry or oil and gas industry as well. Um, occupational health and safety, that has to do with a lot of the standards that the country adopts for, different safety practices on different industrial compounds, different manufacturing standards. Um, you can work with the EMA, you can work with the IMA in trying to meet some of our national and multilateral agreement goals. Um, depending on what you choose to study, if you choose to focus on more international relations, um, with focusing on climate change and environmental science, you could eventually become an ambassador for Trinidad and Tobago, representing us at levels at the UN and the FAO. Um, there are various opportunities in surveying and actually collecting data. Um, so you could actually be more of a data scientist, where you actually go, and these are really, really interesting fields. You actually head out and you scuba dive and you collect samples and you come back and you conduct research. You could be a research assistant, you could be a research analyst. Um, for those who somewhat interested in environmental but also focusing on geography, um, there's the geomatics and surveying option that you could do. You could get into fields such as GIS and mapping, right? So that's using satellites to understand how all the different bits of information that the satellites pick up, and well, drones nowadays. All of these are topics that are really, really closely related to the environment and sciences. And then you have the typical biology and microbiology, chemistry, and you could focus on these fields to actually work with other scientists to come up with different compounds that could be used in manufacturing to further the designs of certain chemical products that we have or certain chemical processes. So the options are there. Um, it takes a lot of hard work and the opportunities, while not, as abundant as others, I would say sticking with the course of investment that you've made in yourself is the best choice of option. Because I do have some friends that I have been through university with who study the same thing as I have. As you're saying, there's a great interest now in environmental science, and you have a lot of folks studying it.
Right.
Um, but it may not always be because of our core passion and a willingness to accept that, okay, I may not immediately work in my field, or I may have to work somewhere else while I also advance my degrees
Very good point.
to be able, yeah, to eventually be able to be where I am.
Mhm.
And in some cases, you find that, okay, because I couldn't get a job immediately, I'll go do something else that's not related to environment. And you just switch, right? And I've seen that happen a lot. So I've had colleagues who, yeah, they studied environment, they were super passionate about environmental, and then they open a construction business, like a regular construction business or a regular sales or retail business afterwards because, you couldn't find work in the environmental sector. Um,
Just I said, I mean, realistically, and this part I'm really asking for students here. Does it pay well? I mean, you did make a good point in saying everybody knows in every career, if you invest in yourself, in the long term, you probably will get rewards most times. But as you're saying, the reality in most fields after university, you may not get your dream job. You may not get the job that you're looking for, your entry level job. So entering this field, does it pay enough to make a good living? What would you say to
yes,
students who are looking at that perspective?
I would say your long-term goals, yes. So I think the perspective from a student, and I could speak this not being myself too far from removed from being a student.
Right.
I recall being in secondary school, and oftentimes we have this perception that, yeah, man, by 30 we're making it, and we have 1 million in the bank, and by 30 you might even be out of school, right? So a lot of the times, I think people have to readjust their focus and readjust their expectations of what life will bring, right? And their expectations of success. So I would say yes, it does pay well. Um, and with any occupation I look at how high you could go,
Right.
right? So if you're working for some multilateral agencies, so the IDBs, the FAOs, you get paid in US dollars. And you get paid based on what a worker, international worker would get paid,
Mhm.
right? So I don't want to give figures
Right.
to
Yeah.
be erroneous, right? But um, an average environmental manager, right? If you Google what an average environmental manager makes, they make roughly around 100,000 US annually,
Mhm.
right? So even if you based in Trinidad, you can make that salary if you're working for a multilateral agency or an international organization. And you have different examples of these. So if you are a seasoned professional in the environmental field, you make a lot of money. You make a decent money to maintain your life, as well as you contribute positively to the development of the country, right? So ultimately, I would say yes, it is very much worth it. Uh, but beyond environmental, it is worth it with anything you have invested your time into. So for me, I could speak closely to environment, to the environmental side of things, because that's where my focus has always been. Um, I remember taking part in um, my first environmental project while I was in Form 6. The NGO which I ended up working for, they came to my community and they actually were deploying one of their first projects, the Vetiver project. It was the first one that they were doing. And being in the community, I had the chance to actually take part. So I took part. I went through the whole program with them. I learned, I made connections. Um, and again, I just kept my interest going from there and continued the relationship when I left university, right? But for others, if you were interested in sewing, right? And you were sewing since you were a little girl and you finished school now and you've done it as a trade and you're like, right, I'm really passionate about starting my sewing business. And you've been sewing already. You might be 21 years old, but you're sewing for 11 years. And then you decide, all right, I don't want to do this anymore because, the first few months have been bad and then you just give up. I don't believe that that's the right way to do things. Just giving up on your passion because something doesn't pay well, or you're having some difficulty at the moment. Because a good example is if you follow through with that, you might see great success. So stick with it, be consistent. If it's something you're passionate in, consistency will always bring success. Um, Definite, because I know the money is a big driving part of it. But you need to also be fulfilled in what it is you're doing.
Yeah,
So,
advice there, good piece of advice. But I'm keeping in mind because of the focus of the type of podcast teachers have used and the fact that I like to kind of keep the students and the teachers in mind as well. And I know that, in Form 6, and you have all these Form 6 students do studying environmental science, as they may call it, but what volunteer opportunities should they look out for if you can give them some advice in terms of volunteer opportunities that might, lead them onto the right path and kind of stoke that passion for the environment?
well, we have a lot of NGOs available in Trinidad and Tobago that you could sign up and register for as a volunteer. So right now, I would encourage persons to check out CZ's page, so the Carbon Zero Institute of Trinidad and Tobago, our page. You could register with us as a volunteer and take part in a lot of the activities that we have going on. Um, and yeah, find a local NGO and reach out. More often than not, there's one within your community. You may have different community or developmental groups, right? So, for example, in Paramin, we have the Paramin Development Committee. Belmont has different small groups like that, different developmental groups, and different areas. You might have village councils in some areas. So actually getting in contact and being part of a group, right? This actually helps, right? And it's with these numbers that you could actually volunteer, reach out to see how you could get funding, reach out to see how you could partner with larger NGOs or larger institutions that are doing some of the things you're interested in. You could reach out sometimes to collaborate. If you have a service that you think you could offer, um, more often than not, they're very excited to work with different individuals as well. So if you have a special talent or skill that you think, okay, working with these folks might help me develop, um, you could always reach out and present that opportunity. I've found that, the folks in this field are usually nice and very receptive to others, because collaboration is a really big part of what we do. So looking for volunteers, and working with others is really, really important. Working with civil society and different social groups. So reach out, and a lot of times there are different opportunities available through the multilateral agencies. As I said myself earlier, I'm a recipient of a scholarship to do my master's, and that comes through CRIF SPC, uh, the Caribbean Climate Risk Reinsurance Facility, segregated portfolio company. So that's CRIF SPC. They offer undergraduate and postgraduate scholarships, which is actually open right now, for persons to apply. So you can check out CRIF's website. That's CCRIF SPC. And you can look for their application for their current postgraduate and undergraduate opportunities, as well as their internship opportunities that are available. These multilateral agencies and international organizations, such as you have one called Erasmus Plus as well. Um, they offer scholarships to go study abroad, study in Europe, do things like student exchange. So I invite persons to really do some information and do some looking as to some of the opportunities available out there, because there are a lot of scholarships and funding opportunities available to study things like risk reduction, environmental protection, and fields related to the environment. There are opportunities available. So I know some persons might be worried about gates and, you know, being in Form 6, what they would do with their future.
Right.
But there are several funding opportunities available once you do the research. But those are two that I could think of immediately.
And what small changes you think that, students in school, teenagers should make to do their part in helping the environment?
I think they need to start at home, right? So look at these small things you could do within your own household. And if some of the information you have about, saving energy or protecting the environment, you could share with someone, I think that is also really, really helpful.
Starting
So
in your home would look like what? Turning off the lights, recycling the garbage.
the most impactful one, I would say, is take a shorter shower, right? Your water heater actually is one of the most energy intensive appliances in your house, right? It pulls more energy than your AC, it pulls more energy than an electric stove. Um, and a lot of people bathe for really, really, really long, sometimes half an hour, sometimes, and they're singing. It, it is not the best advice I could give you is just take shorter showers, please. Um, and that would help us greatly saving on our energy bill.
So you have this background in farming, and how has that influenced your approach to the environmental project management and what you currently do? I know you mentioned it earlier that your father was a farmer as well.
Yes, well, excuse me. Yes, well, I started farming I think when I was 11 years old,
Uh-huh.
with my dad. My first crop was sweet peppers. Um, and I've been going with my dad to the wholesale market since then, planting scythe, tomatoes, cabbage, you name it. I've probably planted it.
Okay.
Um, and right now we're actually doing some work with farmers to develop um, an app, right? That's supposed to help farmers. So my experience as a farmer, really helps in some of the development work when it relates specifically to, farming and those type of activities. I have some experience in, um, the challenges they might face or some of the situations they might find themselves in. So I kind of use that to put myself in their shoes, and empathize with, okay, what would an average farmer in Trinidad won because, I am also an average farmer
Right.
in Trinidad.
What do you think? You know, there's so much going on in the world, I think that's impacting the environment and, just across borders, if I'm using the correct terminology. But what environmental problems do you think the current teenagers will need to solve? So that there's something you are battling now within your job scope, but what about the teenagers? What environmental problems do you foresee us kind of having that they will have to contend with?
Well, I think you aptly described it there earlier. Um, the world is headed in a tricky time. Um, a lot of the focus, I think, may shift, unfortunately, away from the environment, um, because the world is entering a very, very tense time, as we can see.
Right.
And based on a lot of the rhetoric, I would say that's come from global leaders, if I could use a broad term, you could see a lot of movement towards interest in the Arctic. Again, and in understanding the outcomes of what the impacts of climate change are going to be. So we see an opportunity opening up in the Arctic, where there's going to be high levels of exploitation um, by different parties. Could be for transport, shipping lanes, oil and gas, or marine resources. So I see that being one of the major issues emerging. Um, so having to deal with the environmental challenges and consequences of this new type of activity, um, and dealing with how do we balance the interests of those that want to see an accelerated um, melting of these caps,
Hmm.
versus those of us who definitely don't want it, for all the negative reasons associated. Um, we could see now that there are varied interest, in the effects of climate change. It's not only, okay, well, if this one thing's happened, it's only bad news. So some persons are looking forward to opportunities that may arise in the sphere of climate change. Um, so I would say the modern environmentalist, um, and not environmentalist, because anyone could be environmentalist, but the modern environmental scientist needs to be prepared to navigate that kind of situation. So I think teens now need to be very aware of what is happening beyond their own borders and how these things might impact them in the future, right? So looking beyond just, okay, what might climate do to Trinidad and looking more towards, okay, what might this do on a global scale and how could Trinidad prepare as a nation? How could we be prepared to deal with all these things 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years into the future? Um, I think I think that's when it really will hit home for some of the youth. Um, so I think that's the important thing they need to look at. Really giving a broad scope to things, right? Look at things very broadly, um, and don't really be too narrow in your scope. Be a global citizen.
I feel that I think we know that the environment exists and we know because we hear it all our lives, don't destroy the environment and different things, but these things are sometimes very vague and broad statements, and a lot of times people don't know as the world change and as our environment change, what protecting the environment looks like. So are there any myths or misconceptions that you would like to dispel about protecting the environment? You wish people would stop believing about about the environment.
I definitely think that one thing that people need to change is the conception that you can't have sustainability without exploitation or usage by people. So a lot of the time when you speak to general public and they say we need to approach it sustainably or we need to protect the environment,
Right.
um, a lot of persons view this as, okay, we need to stop development or we need to hinder development.
Mhm.
And I don't view it like that. I think sustainability is about reaching a compromise that will allow for development to take place continuously. So it will not only benefit this generation, but benefit the next. And if it is going to have an impact, let that impact be as minimal as possible on the functionality of that ecosystem. And if we're not disturbing the functionality of that ecosystem, the ability for that system to do all the things that, ecologically it's set out to do, and we could still achieve what we need to achieve, then I think that is how we need to start viewing our relationship with the environment. It's not never do this or don't develop because it's going to impact this animal, right? Humans need to survive. We have, thrived as a species for a reason. And we do need to look out for our interests. We have a growing population. So we do have things we need to address, but in light of understanding that you cannot place, human well-being at the back foot. I don't think development will ever do that, will place human well-being behind anything, which is why you see economics really dictating a lot of the pace in terms of environmental and development, right? So I think understanding our place, a human's place, an individual's place within the environment, and how an individual fits into a population, fits into a nation, and how we use the environment to benefit ourselves. I think we really need to take a look in the mirror and see and understand our link in the chain. So a quick example I would give again is the landfills in Beetham, right? Everybody complains, oh, that's an awful landfill. Da, 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 da. But what are we doing to generate less waste as an individual? What are you doing to send less waste to Beetham? Do you have compost bins? Do you separate your waste at home to see what you can recycle and drop off? Most Trinidadians don't, right? So it starts with the individual again and understanding your role in the linkages of everything. And again, understanding that we will have an impact sometimes, but reducing that impact is a responsibility on us. And we also need to find a way to operate as humans in cohesion with that, our own environment, so that we could enjoy it, our kids could enjoy it, their kids could enjoy it. And if their kids decide, okay, we need to develop further again, so the next generation is fine, they could do it with the same ease and peace of mind that we did as well. But it's not about stopping.
Thank you so much, Nikolai Emmanuel. This has been very informative. I've learned a lot, and you've given me a lot to think about. And I hope all of us out there to think about. And I want my listeners to know that you empower minds and you ignite curiosity. Thank you so much, Nikolai.
Thanks so much for having me.